While the number of newly graduated PhDs is rising, the number of long-term or permanent positions in academia is not. This means that most of those PhDs who were working towards a lifetime career in academia will one day realize that they will have to leave. For others, academia simply didn't provide the experience they wanted. But how to navigate the transition out of the Ivory Tower? How does a career work out there? How do I find a fitting job? And how do I manage leaving my social circles behind? The Recovering Academic podcast is out there to help PhDs with that transition. My name is Dennis Eckmeyer, and you are listening to episode 13 of the Science for Societal Progress podcast. But before we continue, let me remind you that Science for Progress needs your support. And the best way to support us is to become a patron on Patreon. You decide your member's fee and level of engagement yourself, and there are perks. For example, the whole uncut conversation of this episode is available for members directly on Patreon. Check it out on www.patreon.com/sci4progress.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Recovering Academic podcast. Today we are doing something different. We are here with Ian and Amanda, as always. But
this is Cleyde introducing another version of this episode that is available on the Recovering Academic podcast. I visited Cleyde, Amanda, and Ian for a crossover. The motto of the Recovering Academic podcast is, "There is sunshine outside the Ivory Tower." And they must know, they all left academia since 2015.
I really liked the bench. I like to do my experiments. I had to do some experiments in the dark as well, but mine were with like a red light, so it wasn't not that bad.
Yeah, the red lights didn't help for me. That didn't do it.
Yeah, but I had a love for research and I really liked what I was doing, but it got to a point I was here in the US and I did my PhD in Brazil. So all the fellowships and the things that I won, they didn't count. I would put them on my CV, but people would not understand them. So they were not valuable. And then my CV was also a big gap on fellowships. And also when I moved to the US, I was in a lab that had 2 R01s. So for those who are not from NIH base, R01 is like the big 5-year multi-million-dollar research. So, and that lasts for like 4 or 5 years. So our lab had, 5 people, 6 people, and we had 2 of those grants. So, I mean, there was a lot of money. Yeah. So I didn't apply for anything. I didn't because I didn't have to. And no one told me that I needed to apply for my CV. So once time passed and then I started to apply, they were like, okay, you don't have anything on your CV. Why we should fund you, you know? And then it comes into like a roller coaster of like, okay, you don't have, we won't give you because you don't have, but if I don't have, I won't get anything, you know?
Yeah, it's a catch-22.
Yes, exactly.
It's like, I like my PhD, okay.
This is Ian speaking.
Like, I always intended to be a scientist, and so, like, my PhD was okay. Like, it's like, oh, yeah, I went to a good school at Washington University in St. Louis, studied plant developmental biology, but it was a hard, isolating experience, but I did it, and it was fine, and I got to do some interesting things. Like I was, for part of that time, in charge of inviting seminar speakers. Like students, like the grad students as a group, we'd get together and nominate speakers. Like, hey, we can invite a speaker. And I would be in charge of handling some of the logistics and invitations and doing that kind of stuff. Which was fun. And then I got a postdoc and did that for way too long, I feel. Like, because again, like there's always this sense of just isolation, and I didn't feel a sense of growth anymore. And like spent many hours in a dark microscope room with laser beams, as well as some experiments like using a green safety light. Plants don't really see green light very well, and so you can use green light as illumination, so you can see what you're doing a little bit in a dark room to harvest your dark grown seedlings. And I spent many hours doing stuff like that, like growing plants in there, growing Arabidopsis in its quote-unquote natural environment of a petri dish. And, like, you know, it's just, yeah, like, at the end, it's like, you know, I'm not growing here anymore. Like, I got my one big paper out of my postdoc, and that was good. I started writing about science, and, like, I just like, you know, I like exploring the ideas more than actually doing them myself, I think. I still didn't have a good idea of, like, what I would do out beyond academia besides, like, try to make it as a science writer, which I think still would be my long-term goal. But through Twitter and networking, like, I found my job as a virtual lab manager at Happy Labs, where I work now. And I'm continuing to do, like, my writing and editing as I can on the side, because I do enjoy that. And, like, I'm still, like, you know, my science advocacy comes in the form of, like, I'm an editor for the National Postdoc Association's newsletter here in the United States. Yeah, and so, like, we put out an issue every month and email it to the 30,000 people or so who are subscribed to that list, whatever that number is. Yeah, so that's my story in a nutshell.
I didn't spend hardly any time in the dark.
And this is Amanda.
I spent a lot of time. Most of my time was spent underneath fluorescent lights. However, the lab that I was in for my postdoc had 0 windows and was in the interior of a building. So, yes, I did have that. And for me, it was just a realization that I didn't really enjoy doing bench work anymore, and that I didn't really want to have the whole PI thing where you move away from doing bench work and then you deal a lot more with, like, administrative and paperwork and stuff. And it became a lot more of this, I don't know, like, political sort of administrative thing. And what I really liked doing was, found that I liked doing was I liked editing work. Like, I like being involved at the beginning stages when people are kind of like how Ian is. Like, he likes exploring the ideas more than actually doing the work. Or at least I think that's what you said. Like, I like being at the beginning stages when people are planning out a project because everybody's really excited about it. And then I like being at the end because everybody's really happy that it's over. But the middle part, where it's this long slog of things not working, where you could have just stayed in bed all day and at the end of the day had the same exact results because nothing worked, really got to me. So, after doing my postdoc, I decided that I would do some editing work because I had gotten a position with Bite Size Bio to edit for them. And then I had faculty members who were like, hey, you can write, you can edit this stuff, and I'll pay you money. So that was kind of a relief at that point. So that's kind of how I transitioned out.
Yeah, I feel like the 4 of us,
She's including me,
have kind of like the feeling of relief after we were done, and there's always like the transition period, like getting there, or getting to the point where you say, okay, I am done with this, I'm going to finally take the leap and leave academia. But that's the transition. But then after you decide it and you go there and do it, it kind of like feels good.
Mm-hmm.
But is it all peachy? No. There's a reason why Recovering Academic exists.
So, right after I started my transition, which was summer of 2016?
Yeah.
Something
right.
like that. Yeah, so, like, I was feeling a little lost because I had just, quit my job and started working for myself and for Bite Size Bio. And I was kind of like, I felt like I was on my own because everybody who I was friends with on Twitter was still in academia. Or not everybody, but a lot of people were. And just kind of felt like I had lost my tribe. And I had talked to Cleyde a bunch about transitioning. Like, I talked her ear off, and
yeah, because I had transitioned 1 year before. So that's why Amanda was like, she called me and then we were talking on the phone and she was like, hey, I'm thinking about this. What do you think? And also, like, how are you dealing with those things? And
yes. And then Ian had contacted me about editing with Bite Size Bio, or like general, like, kind of like informational-ish sort of interview, but sort of. And then, around that time, like, and because he was transitioning after
Right.
me.
I still had not left academia yet when we started this.
Yes.
Yeah, but you were thinking.
Well, yeah, I was definitely
But you
going to
were
be
still
leaving.
working.
Like, I was there, but
Yeah,
Right.
you had decided, I
Right.
think, but you were
Yeah.
still as a postdoc.
Right.
And so about that time, decided that, you know, what would be really cool would be able to do a podcast where we talked about these issues.
Yep. And we all
And so then-
know each other from Twitter, basically. Yeah.
Yeah,
You find all their
we
Twitter
met- we
contacts
met each
and
other on
their
Twitter,
website
and
in the
so
show
we
notes.
follow each other, and we were kind of like Twitter friends. And then
Yeah.
when Amanda she was like, oh, I feel like there's a lot of people, there's a lot in the internet about how to, like the basic things, the practical things about
Yes.
how to change the CV to the resume, or how to find your transferable skills. There's a lot in the internet about this, but there is not that much about the struggle that is to leave academia, the emotional
Right.
part of that.
Yeah,
And that's kind of how we felt that
And-
that was missing. And we were like, well, maybe we can try to start a podcast and see how it goes.
Right.
And it actually was very successful, more than
Yeah.
yeah.
We thought.
Yeah, like I expected maybe, like, I figured my parents would probably download an episode. Like, you know, maybe a couple of friends would.
Yeah, and I mean, the other part of that, too, I think, is like, one, it's working to create a community of people who are transitioning out of academia, because that's normal, and like, I don't know how much we all connect with
Yes.
each other. But there's also, like, you know, all the practical advice that's out there that is generally really solid advice, right? Like, here's networking that works, and here's CVs and resumes that work, and, you know, like, there's a lot of that out there, but, like, it's really hard to necessarily, like, okay, does that fit my situation exactly, and how do you apply this, and, like, how does it feel to, like, even, like, start doing that work to get to, like, oh yeah, I'm an excellent networker, or I'm great
Yes.
at resumes,
Mhm.
you know, like, because, you know, I'm still sort of at the point where it's like, oh, a resume, it's sort of like, you know, the best BS version of you're putting out to the world for that specific job, right? Like, and I was like, you know, again, like, maybe this is like cynicism and elitism attitude from academia of just saying, like, you know, oh, is it marketing? Then it's lying. Like, but, you know, like, well, I think we're there for that too, just to, like, you know, like, how do we apply this advice, and how does that work in practice, and how messy that actually is, even though, like I said, the advice is great a lot of the time, and, like, we do that here too sometimes, like, you know, but give advice, but, you know, applying it's hard, like, it doesn't fit perfectly, and we're here to say, like, yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, and the other thing is that usually when you're leaving academia, where, like, when you're in this transition and you don't know, you're not happy, but you don't know what to do, usually you are in this academia bubble. So you are in academia still, and then you're surrounded by your PIs, by other postdocs, other graduate students, and maybe they don't want to be outside academia. They like it. And then you feel like you're the only person in the world that has those feelings, and you're all by yourself, and you don't have anybody to talk to. And that's one of the things that I heard most about our listeners. They're like, oh, it's so good to listen, to see that there's other people that think the same as I am, that feel the same as I am. And I feel like this is the main reason why we got a lot of followers, and people keep listening to our podcast, because they identify to what we're talking in a way, you know?
I must say, I listened to the episode that Ian talked about, or you probably had several episodes about it, networking, and I very much related with the problem of what is networking really, and is it really that big of a thing, or is it just, you know, showing up, and then if you see somebody interesting, saying hello and try to have a conversation, and then not forgetting about that person, you know, you write down their address, and if, I don't know, connect on LinkedIn or something. And actually part of why I do my podcast is in order to connect It's part of my way to do networking. As a fellow podcaster, of course, I was interested in learning how Recovering Academic found its audience.
We started doing Twitter, and I guess that that was how we got it started, and basically from word to mouth. But what really picked up was after we published the piece on Science Magazine. That was about a year ago. So we published that piece, and then after that piece, then we got a huge, I think that our number of downloads doubled in a month. It was huge. And so this was what happened to us. And I don't know how you could, there's so many podcasts out there now. It's now it's, I have a podcast is the new, I had a blog that it was 10 years ago. It seems that everybody has a podcast, and, and it's so hard, to find the time to listen to everything that you want. So it's tough.
After more than 2 years and some success finding a wider audience, I wanted to know which episodes they enjoyed themselves the most. Except this one.
I was going to say, this one's my favorite so far. I think I really like our pilot. That's one of the ones that I've really enjoyed, and I've listened to that one again.
Despite the sound having been so bad?
The sound's not so bad, but I really liked, it was a good introduction to our entire podcast, so I liked it.
The episode where, we all lost it about, I think we're talking about how fitting in, and, I made the joke about, with orchids finding the fungus.
Yeah, I thought about this as well.
I think that one, I think we called it Finding Your Fungus.
Yes.
And, anyway, it was, we were talking about finding your right career match in a new job. And I think that was a good episode, very relevant to everybody. And so that's my favorite episode.
All of our episodes, we just open Skype, we choose a topic, and we talk, and that's it. So it's usually a lot of fun, it's kind of it's our time that it's almost as we were sit down in a bar, having a drink and just discussing science, and we're recording. So all of them are kind of a different type of fun. But I also thought about this finding your fungus was the one that at least we were it was so funny. We Ian will keep talking about how each orchid has his own fungus, and you have to find your fungus. And me and Amanda, we couldn't talk because we were laughing so much that it was so.
Because just for people who don't know, orchid seeds are minimal, tiny dust specks, and they produce millions of them, but only a very few will land in the right spot and find the right symbiotic relationship with the right fungus to actually bloom and grow, because orchids have to have a fungus to actually thrive. And it's crazier when you think about orchids. Most orchids are epiphytes. They grow on other plants even. So, you can imagine, orchid that grows in the soil and the ground, spreads its seeds everywhere. You're bound to find a fungus that's compatible, because the whole soil is made of fungi, right? But, no. A lot of orchids live in trees.
Why make it so difficult? Come on.
Right. It's even more bizarre. Orchids are...
Life is difficult, Dennis. You think that everything is easy? No, it's not.
Right. And it provides a good analogy for career transitions, you see.
Amanda, Cleyde, and Ian founded their podcast because they themselves felt the need for such conversation. So looking back on the last 2 years, what did they learn from it and from their guests?
So for me, it was that no matter how you feel, you're not alone. There's a lot of people who have the same conflicted feelings that you might have, and that everybody comes through those feelings on the other side, and they come out generally much happier than they were than before.
Besides some of the practical skills of, I think learning to talk on a microphone is interesting, and getting some skills in like actually interviewing people, is very, very useful in a lot of ways. And like Amanda was saying, I think, I've learned like, there's a lot, it's nice not feeling alone. And there's a whole community of people out there who are like having these similar struggles of figuring out, where to fit in the world as, as PhDs moving beyond academia, which is like 80% of PhDs at this point who don't end up in academia. And I hope that, I can't say this for sure. Like, we don't have a good measure of it, but like, I hope we're doing some good in the world for those people who are just feeling like, yeah, I'm alone and like no one else is going through this. Like, well, no, there's a whole community of us out here. And I don't know if we can help you specifically, but it's nice to at least commiserate and understand, like, yeah, these are, problems that people have, right?
I used to live in such a bubble. Like I used to work in neuroendocrinology, and even academic wise, I used to also only talk to other neuroscientists. And so knowing like all the other things that are beyond my field and how those people can get out of academia and do totally different things was kind of mind-blowing, because I had no idea that there were so many people like PhDs with so many diversity and all the things that people were doing. Like, people get creative, So it was really nice to learn, I think, like kind of like internal grow about how everybody is, the different paths that everybody's taking. And for me, I think that also it's very rewarding because every once in a while we receive a comment, someone contacts us through our website and kind of like thank us how we help them in their transition, and how just listening to us they could relate to what we were doing. And every time, like when I am at Banter.
Cleyde is referring to the Neuro Banter, a party organized by neuroscientists who met on Twitter, and it takes place during the conference of the Society for Neuroscience, the largest neuroscience conference.
And I've met a lot of people. Sometimes people come to me and say, hey, I listened to your podcast and it's so nice. And you kind of feel important and famous for a little bit. But I feel like it's very rewarding to feel like you are doing something that is appreciated and it's helping people out there. So that's one thing.
Of course, we also talked about Science for Progress. I explained that my goal is to have a lay audience interested in academia. Yeah, so part of it is trying to give them the tools to deal with the situation and to understand why we talk the way we talk, why it all kind of sounds like we are not certain, and why we would change our minds on things. And that's just part of being a scientist, that you change your mind if there's new evidence. But what people need to understand is that still the mainstream science opinion is usually a pretty sound one based on evidence, and there's usually few alternatives out there that would have any merit compared to the scientific opinion.
Right, and whether the picture is complete or not, because some of the things, it's, we've had 150 years of like building that up, right, from, like thinking about things like evolution and climate change, like scientists have been on top of that, and studying that for over, for hundreds of years now, and it's like, yeah, we've got a pretty solid idea of what's going on, even if there are still questions about how it works. Right, it's like, in general, this is the picture, like, and it's a pretty clear one as far as we know, right? Because there's a lot of things.
Yeah, but still, even like this, there are some like data from like 150 years ago. It was not climate change, for instance, the way that people would measure things, the instruments were different from the ones that we have now. So it's hard to compare, and a lot of it's a lot of that. Even if we've been studying for a long time, it's tough to get into. Okay, that's why there's so much non-consensus about like what is climate change, like that is happening, yes, but like in absolute numbers, we cannot say, it's impossible.
Right. But at the same time, I'm also thinking just the idea that 150 years ago, there was somebody, I forget who they were, but somebody was like, hey, Industrial Revolution, we're dumping a lot of stuff into the atmosphere. I wonder if that could change things, and especially with the carbon dioxide, if that's going to heat up the Earth. Like, that was 150 years ago. Like, just that idea was put out there, and scientists have since confirmed that pretty well, right? Like, there's another thing about academia that you might cover on your podcast, Ennis, is things like, oh, well, so scientists, easy research grants to get, like, the fact that you had, like, a grant specialist, right, on, and, like, Amanda is a grant editor, right, in part. Like, these things are not easy to get or produce. The ideas don't come easily for, like, what's worth, like, putting in. And it's always hard to make the case for foundational science, right? Just because you always have to make the case in retrospect, right? It's always like, no, 20 years ago, a scientist had this idea in their lab and got a research grant to study it, and now it's everywhere in business and being applied into the real world. Right? It's always looking back. It's like, oh, we have GPS because Albert Einstein figured out relativity. Right? Like, like this was like not a practical discovery at the time. It's like, hey, here's how the universe seems to work.
We have lasers that weren't that was not a practical discovery at the time. It was just hey, let's see how this works.
Right, like that was another thing that came out of relativity, right? It's like, oh, like we could like do this thing with light, and let's see if we can make that. We see if we can make that application work. And it's like, oh, it does, cool. Like we have no use for it, but it works. And now scientists and everyone who has to give a talk uses a laser pointer.
Right. Well, and we use lasers for surgery.
Well, yes, I shouldn't just dismiss all of lasers to just having laser pointers.
It's not just a cat toy.
Now they want to. They even want to push a spaceship through space with a laser now, right? Yeah. So the idea is to not have a spaceship full of fuel, which would be very heavy, and you would have a lot of problems accelerating it, because the more you want to accelerate it, the more fuel you need, and the more fuel you have on board, the harder it is to accelerate. And they want to. The idea is now to just have a huge sail, and then point a laser at it and push it with the strength of light, which apparently in outer space is enough to accelerate continuously. And they say they can get to a pretty high speed doing that.
I guess it's like that. I guess outer space is pretty frictionless, huh?
Yes, apparently.
Kind of like
well, there is some, right?
Textbooks.
There's always some stuff, but yeah.
So going back just quickly to like the other thing that we I think we can do as a recovering academic as a podcast here is, I mean, get some sense of what the world of outside of academia is like as a PhD, and introduce, academia, like more people in academia to the broad things that people with PhDs actually end up doing in the world. Because a lot of people don't have any clue, like PhD students and postdocs, and even professors who might be mentoring them, and it's like, I don't know what you're going to do outside of academia. Like, I am clueless. So hopefully our podcast can provide some bridge between those things.
And with this, we end this episode. You can find the Recovering Academic podcast under recoveringacademic.net, and their Twitter account is @recoveringacad. And of course, if you haven't already, subscribe to Science for Societal Progress on the podcast app of your choice. Our website is www.scienceforprogress.eu, and you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter under @Sci4Progress. And don't forget to check us out on Patreon. Bye bye.